Hello, everyone, and welcome to uh, Policy Positions and Perspectives, brought to you by the HBCU Center for Research, Leadership, and Policy here at Howard University. My name is Melanie Carter. I'm Associate Provost and Director of the Center, and we look forward to an engaging conversation. We have a great topic today. Our topic today is Affording the Dream, the Impact of Student Loan Reform on HBCU Access and Success. And we have a great panel of participants here who will join me in conversation about this really critical topic. And so I would like to introduce first my colleague, Dr. Jorge Burmicky, who has really been engaged in this research and has done some amazing work around student loan reform and some of the issues that we're confronting right now. And so I'd like to ask Dr. Burmicky to introduce himself and also to our other colleagues who are joining us on this panel. Dr. Burmicky?
Thank you, Dr. Carter. And it's just really wonderful to be here and share about something that has been very important for us to share with wider audiences. We've learned so much, and it's just exciting to be given the platform. So thank you so much. As Dr. Carter shared, my name is Dr. Jorge Burmicky. I served as an assistant professor of higher education, leadership, and policy studies here at Howard University. And broadly, my research revolves around leadership in higher education, capacity building, and really a variety of things that touch on the very broader landscape of leadership. But really, what brings me here today is our research directly related to Parent Plus loans. And this research was funded by Arnold Ventures, is a partnership between Howard University, the University of Wisconsin, Madison, as well as the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Three of us who are tackling this topic, both through quantitative and qualitative data. And broadly speaking, just to give you a general idea, what we're doing is trying to understand what Parent Plus loans, the process, the simple act of taking out the loan, navigating the landscape, what that looks like for students, and of course their parents, because it's Parent Plus loans, as well as staff and financial administrators at all types of universities, of course, including HBCU. So we really want to get a holistic of an understanding of what it means to take out Parent Plus loans from those perspectives, students, parents, and financial aid administrators. We have so much to share, but I'll leave it there and I'll have my colleagues, Aaron and Darion, introduce themselves.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burmicky. Hi there, my name is Aaron Carter. I'm a second year PhD student in the Higher Education Leadership and Policy program here at Howard. And it's a pleasure to join everyone today.
And hello, everybody. My name is Darion McFadden. I'm a third year PhD student in higher education leadership policy studies here at Howard University. And it's a pleasure.
All right. It's so great to have um, Aaron and Darion join us in this conversation and also be a part of the work that is so important in terms of really understanding what's happening in the student loan and Parent Plus loan space. It has all kinds of implications for higher education and certainly for HBCU. So again, I'm so sorry about that. Very much so pleased that they're here to join us and have this important conversation. And I'll repeat that, Isaiah, because you may need to clip it because my phone rang. So again, I would just like to say, well, really happy that Aaron Carter and Darian McFadden are joining us today, two great students who are not only have some critical perspective about this topic, have really been engaged in research around this important topic. So thank you so much, Darian and Aaron, for joining us. So I'm gonna have a series of questions. Of course, this is a pressing topic, a critical topic that we could spend all day talking about. And so I have a few questions that I like to raise, but certainly I expect the conversation will from the conversation, other questions will emerge. And so the intent is really to think deeply in the time that we have today and to talk about some of the critical issues facing us in higher education as all of this reform and this conversation and discourse around student loans and specifically Parent Plus loans really becomes a central topic. So the first question I want to just ask is a broader question, really. How will recent loan policy changes, specifically regarding Parent Plus loans, impact HBCUs and their students?
Yeah, I think that's a great initial question. And I think it merits a little bit of background before we dive into how it impacts HBCUs. So first and foremost, we are familiar with a big bill that was just recently passed on July 4th that will go into effect on July of 2026. So not right away, but we have July 2026. So that's very important to understand. The biggest structural change, there are many changes, but the biggest one to keep in mind for this conversation is that previously Parent Plus loans had no cap in terms of amounts being able to borrow. Now we're capping per student 20,000, and when I say per student, undergraduate student, because something that is really critical to understand is that the Grad Plus loan starting again July 2026 will be gone. So this is specifically for undergraduate students. The cap is now 20,000 per year. So an annual cap of 20,000 and a total cap of 65,000 for the entire duration of their college experience. So we've introduced new caps for undergraduate students and getting rid of the Grad Plus loan. So connecting it to, so that has all kinds of implications that we're going to have to dive into details today. And I'm certainly excited to hear Aaron and Darion's perspective from being so attuned to our data, collecting, hundreds of minutes on focus groups and students and interviews with students and parents. But the biggest thing is that this has specific implications, particularly for smaller HBCUs. And what I mean with smaller HBCUs are typically around the 2,000 student enrollment. Because this money has tremendous implications for their operational budget. Something that from talking to financial administrators, particularly senior financial aid leaders at HBCUs, is that the amount of Parent Plus loan monies that comes into these smaller HBCUs is felt across these universities when it comes to their operational budget. Now, the biggest thing that I think it's important to know, the broader conversation about Parent Plus loans is often geared towards middle to high income earners who are looking for financial liquidity. That's been sort of the broader conversation in the policy landscape around Parent Plus loans, and to a degree, particularly when we look at data, that continues to be the case in that higher to middle income borrowers are borrowing larger sums of Parent Plus loan. However, it's really important to understand that when we're talking to particularly a lot of HBCU families and lower income borrowers, and really just borrowers in general, the framing of Parent Plus loans has been more around not so much financial liquidity, but really as a last resort type of tool to ensure that their children are able to fulfill their dreams. That's been the central conversation that is really critical to understand, and why I think it impacts HBCUs, because at the end of the day, we know that HBCUs, particularly smaller HBCUs with smaller endowments, don't have the endowments and financial means to be able to subsidize that gap, okay? Which is why many of our families that we're speaking to say, this is what I needed to do in order to either enroll my kid in college, or oftentimes, as we heard, and I'm excited to hear what Aaron and Darion have to say about this, to ensure that they're able to graduate, because the investment has been made. So again, this sort of last resort tool is really critical to make sure that they get that degree, because obviously that is critical, particularly when it comes to repaying these loans. You have to have that degree. So I think that's a really interesting conversation to keep in mind, is that these conversations have been so framed around financial liquidity. For a lot of these families, is more so about the last resort. What do we do? And it has tremendous implications when now the caps have been lifted. There's new terms, and we have to re-educate ourselves about what this tool means. I'm going to stop there because we have so much to share and unpack about this. But Aaron and Darian, I'll let you chime in to kind of add to what I've already shared.
Yeah, I think just to add, I think that's such an incredible analysis of kind of the macro impact that this is going to have for institutions. I think one of the things that Darian and I have gotten a chance to see, to Dr. Burmicky's point, and just hearing the the minutes from conversations from students is what the student experience is as it relates to these Parent Plus loans. And it's clear even prior to the changes, the ways in which the complex nature of these loans was really impacting students. And to be frank, their parents' understanding of what the loans were. There were moments where there was a significant gap between what actually were Parent Plus loans and what students knew. There were gaps between what those loans were and what their parents thought those loans were. And I think that this is a reflection of what happens when you have a policy that is so partisan, that gets so changed so rapidly, and something that has such a dire impact on students. So you have this policy that's changing, and to Dr. Burmicky's points, the rules and the benchmarks are rapidly changing. And it was really clear even before those changes that there wasn't always a clear understanding of what those policies and programs meant. And so I think on the researcher side, there will be more data about how confused people may be moving forward with this. And I think that's something that we're not excited to capture, but I think is going to be a part of the story moving forward, is just people having to navigate in real time what these loans are. And to your point, Dr. Burmicky, it's often when you're stuck in a moment where you're just trying to make sure your kid can graduate. And that isn't always I think, a very fruitful place to be from an economic decision-making perspective. So.
And I think picking up on what Aaron said as far as like graduation, so adding this cap is going to impact, access to institutions. That's a big thing that we look at. But then we also have to think about for the students being able to, stay in school to be retained. That is going to be something that we look at. And then once we look at, students actually leaving, because some students talked about the student loan debt burden. When we talk about like repayment options, this really isn't making students excited about going to these higher education institutions, because they go there and then now it's like, okay, I have to struggle. And then they're thinking, when I graduate, I may not be able to pay this back. So it's really a burden financially, but also it's a mental burden.
The other thing that I wanted to quickly add before we transition to the next question is a lot of the perspectives that are being visited right now as a result of the policy change is, of course, students and parents, as we should. And I really do think that that should be the number one perspective that we need to be visiting. But when we talk to financial aid administrators, especially financial administrators at HBCUs, the conversation really is a little bit more nuanced, because the conversation is typically, we of course do not want our students to be taken out on more loans. I think everybody can agree that the less loans we can borrow, the better. No one's really arguing for wanting to balloon people's ability to take out on more loans, because we know of the consequences that it has later on in life when it comes to purchasing a home, retirement, it's particularly for the parents that have to repay these loans, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest thing is understanding that when we are able to package a student, we typically go with all the merit-based aid first, scholarships, grants that are sometimes coming either from the state or private grants, et cetera, all of the scholarships, just so we can front load all of the aid that is being given that doesn't have to be paid back. After that is when we start introducing the conversation about loans. And there's a whole lot of, a big range of loans that can be offered. In fact, I wouldn't quite say from our participants that Parent Plus loans are at the top of the loans that first get introduced. So we just want to be transparent that it's not like HBCUs or really colleges in general are saying, please take out more Parent Plus loans. That's not at all the narrative. And it's really important to say that. But it is certainly a tool that we had to make sure that we can not just enroll the student, but keep them at our institution and making sure that they can, again, fulfill their dream. My biggest concern policy-wise is that as the rules change, and again, this is happening very quickly, a big hesitation that families do have, as well as financial aid offices, what is the legitimacy of private loans that are out there? What are the interest rates that we have? Everybody here knows that we are in a very scam-oriented environment right now when it comes to predatory lenders and all kinds of things, interest rates that are no good. So rightly so, both financial aid administrators and students are very skeptical about the other options, okay? because for a long time, these federal loans have been more trustworthy, have had better repayment plans. And I know we're going to get into the conversation about repayment plans in a little bit, but have also had more competitive interest rates. So as we see private lenders seize the opportunity, we got to make sure that we're working together so that students, families, and financial administrators feel good about the alternative options. I really feel like that's where the policy conversation is lacking. Going back to Aaron's comment about being partisan, this affects every single person in the United States, regardless of your political affiliation. So we have to make sure that as we make these really critical changes, we're also trying to come up with good alternatives that borrowers and financial aid administrators in colleges feel good about, regardless of, again, what you believe about borrowing, where you stand in the political spectrum. We have to provide users with credible and reliable information.
I love that, Dr. Mickey. I think that's so incredibly important for a variety of reasons, all of which you articulated very well. Because a part of this has to do, I know we were speaking or exchanging notes earlier around this sort of mystical nature of what really is a student loan. And a part of it is how are parents and students and counselors, high school counselors and others educated or about student loans or even sharing the story of affordability in college. And so really understanding what's required financially, not only in the short term, but the long term. Because one of the things that strikes me about the caps, also it talks about caps per student. So if you're a parent of a moderate income and your first child, you can borrow up to 65,000. So then your second child, of course, we know there's certainly a strong linkage between siblings. So then the next one comes, and then do you again borrow $65,000, or is that affordable? Is that feasible? Not only for the student, but the parent plus loans are completely the parents' obligations, and really understanding that. And so I really appreciate that you are speaking directly with students and parents and financial aid administrators, and having this conversation that can inform policymakers about how do we really have a conversation about affordability and support, federal support, for example, or other kinds of support for college to make sure that the policies complement each other. So, is front loading a good thing? Right. What does that mean? What does this mean for Pell Grants? If we know that a disproportionate number of Pell Grant students, don't necessarily need Parent Plus, but others do who might have some other kind of need. So this whole conversation is so critically important because it really will have an immediate impact upon um, families and students in terms of their ability to attend, and an immediate impact upon universities and colleges who depend upon these various sources or resources for students to be able to attend, because otherwise, in many cases, they could not. So I really appreciate the way that you've all sort of provided some context for us to enter this conversation. And 2026 is tomorrow in my book. Okay. Okay. Because people are applying and right now and expecting responses from colleges and universities in November. And so preparing to pay for a university education for fall of 26, the preparation should have begun certainly years before, but certainly right now it is of immediate concern to parents and students and families and universities about what this will mean. So I really appreciate you providing some background, and also look forward to some of these other questions and comments that will emerge. So I know certainly with the last administration, there was a big emphasis on repayment, right, and even forgiveness, and that administration looked at a variety of ways to perhaps decrease if not the overall indebtedness, certainly the pressure that parents and students in particular, not so much parents with the Parent Plus, were feeling around that. So I'm wondering, how will these repayment plans? I was reading a report recently, I think you all shared around repayment plans, what that might mean in this iteration. Um, for parents and Parent Plus loans, and also for students, and how that will impact students and families and institutions. Any comments about that?
Yeah, I'll start in very briefly. So another big change that is coming down the pipeline, again, 2026, basically tomorrow, as Dr. Carter was saying, is that under the old rules for Parent Plus loans, you could be eligible for an income-driven repayment plan, okay? That is no longer going to be the case. You're not automatically eligible for being a part of an income-driven repayment plan. And then the other implication that that has is that oftentimes these income-driven repayment plans are also connected to specific types of loan forgiveness programs. So a big popular one is, of course, the PSLF, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Plan, which you must be under a income-driven repayment plan in order to be eligible. So all of that eligibility is changing in 2026. So for all of borrowers who have already borrowed PPL, Parent Plus loans, they do have the opportunity to consolidate before the 2026 July deadline. But if not, the eligibility for income-driven repayment plans completely change. So this is something that is really, really important for everybody to understand, because in addition to all of these changes with caps, there's also changes coming down in terms of repayment, okay? There is a program that is being introduced. I'm not very familiar with it, about other alternatives for repayment. I'm not really familiar with the details, so everybody else feel free to chime in. But as we know, it is changing. So why is this really important for families to know? As we know, Parent Plus loans are the person responsible for paying back the loan is the parent. What we're hearing from conversations is that oftentimes they like to they prefer to take out these Parent Plus loans because, of course, they don't want to deny their child their ability to either enroll or graduate from college, but also because of unexpected bills. The most common ones that we've heard is health bills. Of course, we all know how devastating it can be to have large health bills to families. But then also parents are nearing retirement. So not having the option of an income-driven repayment plan could be devastating when it comes to actually managing your own retirement as a parent, when you already are taking care of your own bills, but on top of that, you have a substantial bill that is now kicking in as a result of your Parent Plus loans. So that is yet another piece of education that I really think is really important for us to start talking more widely, because it really has tremendous ramifications for borrowers, but also for institutions to feel good about what they're directing students to do. Because I think that we all there's a pervasive rhetoric of like universities are, we don't care about people borrowing, the spending craze that we always get. No, that is not at all what we want. We want responsible, ethical borrowing when needed, because we know that life happens, and health and retirement, those are realities. They're not mystical, as Dr. Carter was saying. Those are realities that we're hearing from our participants. So we have to be prepared. And I'll let Aaron and Darion chime in.
Oh, yes. So I would like to reiterate everything that Dr. Mickey said. I think a salient point to remember is when we talk about, Black students, they have a disproportionate student loan debt burden, and that's very important when we start to get into conversations of, generational wealth. And it's just very impactful that we stay considerate of all of the like forgiveness options, because with some of those potentially changing, like if I recall, like the save plan might have changed, but all of those options, like the more options the merrier, especially because it's going to be important for encouraging, I think, more students to borrow responsibly, but also be able to have the opportunity to afford a higher education.
Yeah, I think those are all really incredible points. And I think as we're thinking about, especially I think when we're thinking about Black students, I think the conversation around debt aversion and generational debt aversion, I think is also something to really think about, not just the difficulties when it comes to the logistics of getting these loans, but also what does it mean mentally and emotionally and from our generationally to hold this kind of debt, and what ethnic groups or racial groups are more adverse to holding debt, I think is something to consider. Also, too, when we're talking about the changes in these loans, I think also as scholars, we're really thinking about what does this mean for students now, and what does it mean for institutions now. And I think there is also a larger conversation about the ways in which the changes in these debt repayments impact, to Dr. Burmicky's point, home ownership and our willingness to take risk when it comes to jobs, and our willingness to innovate when it comes to business. And all of those things are only possible. Like, I started a nonprofit. I always tell people this. I started a nonprofit after college. The only reason why I was able to do that in particular was because I had parents that were willing to pay for me to go to college, and because I didn't have the burden of that repayment. And that, to me, is a prime example of what not having debt can do in terms of innovation and in terms of taking your degree and making it do something. What does it mean for future innovation when you're not sitting with that kind of debt over you? So I do think it has these really larger societal impacts that even for us as scholars, we're not necessarily even looking at. We're not looking at what are the home ownership rates of students, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. And I think those statistics will bear a really interesting relationship right now between the changes in these loans, and I think the ways in which those manifest in the future. So
I think those are incredibly important points. And I think, this issue around student loans and the very things you're talking about, from home ownership to long-term impact on families, the debt, is a conversation that's actually been going on for many years. I remember in 2015, I was invited um, to a convening with the Department of Treasury around this issue. And in that room were people from all over, all kinds of universities, researchers and scholars who raised the issues that you're raising, Aaron, and that you are raising in your work. And there were a lot of, and so there was a comparison between student loan debt and the um, uh, home crisis, in the early 2000s. And so, and what that meant in terms of the ability of these folks, people who have loans and this debt, to engage fully, whether it be home ownership, what that meant in terms of their job prospects, what it meant in a whole. It has all kinds of implications that impacts not only that single individual, but communities and families and on and on and on. And so, and certainly mental health and all the kinds of things that we're talking about. And I think this is a particularly important question now, as we think about many people who are finishing, this is students everywhere, finishing undergraduate degrees and hoping to become entrepreneurs, or hoping to do other kinds of work that really requires them to be not only credit worthy, but have access to some finances. And debt burden is real, and particularly when we talk about these high amounts. And one of the things I think is so important about your study is to actually talk with students and parents about what this means for them day to day and long term, and therefore future opportunities. This ideal debt aversion, certainly when we think about financial aid officers and others who are talking with parents who have student loan debt themselves, right? How then do you not convince them or tell them about the options where they're trying to manage some of this debt? So even as I think about some of the takeaways around making sure they understand CAPS, making sure we understand repayments, making sure that we understand that this debt will be with you. It's not easily dischargeable. So all these kinds of policies, what do the bankruptcy policies look like? Because there was a time, I'm old enough to remember, when loans could be discharged. People don't want to do that. No one wants to declare bankruptcy. But again, understanding that the implications and the consequences for these loans are far reaching, but also from the institutional standpoint, how do we advocate for policies, right, and practices and education that will be helpful to all of us? individually and collectively. So I think this work is so important, and these questions are so very important to all of us. So thank you so much. And I know you all spoke. I think Dr. Burmicky spoke about this as well as both Aaron and Darian in terms of this disproportionate. I think you used that term, Darian, disproportionate debt among students at HBCUs. And what specifically do you mean by that? We talked about that, but could you all provide some more specificity around that in terms of how this may have a disproportionate impact on students attending HBCUs and the institutions themselves?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about just the disproportionate effect, it's talking about compared to the actual percentage of students per race and how much they're borrowing based off of the actual percentage, not necessarily the number of people that are borrowing. But when we talk about those percentages and how it looks based on institution type, sometimes, well, not sometimes, all the time, we would see at HBCUs because they are chronically underfunded. Sometimes you might not have the scholarship options that a high endowment, high earning, a PWI may have, or a predominantly white institution may have, and that causes students to have to take out loans for their education.
And I think, that's excellent, Darian. And I would say beyond just HBCUs, we do know, we do have data that Black graduate students are disproportionately overrepresented in the in the total debt, particularly when it comes to peers of other races. And part of it has to do with, of course, as Darian was just sharing, not just Black graduate students attending HBCUs, but Black students attending any institution in the United States because of the generational wealth that Aaron has that shared a little bit earlier, as well as some of the already existing debt that they might have taken during undergrad. So this is very well documented. It is something that we have to take very seriously, particularly HBCUs, because we certainly don't want to be a part of the problem. But we also need to, again, find tools that help us address the problem, because it's very easy to say, oh, okay, yeah, we're not going to do it again. But also, is it really fair to deny students of an education? Particularly when oftentimes our students, particularly graduate students, are the first in their family to ever accomplish a graduate degree. And we also know what that does to social mobility, which we're very proud at our HBCUs to share how we fare compared to our peers, especially our PWR peers, when it comes to social mobility. So that, we have conflicting messages there, and we have to come up with an alternative, because the answer is not just simply saying, no, we're not going to take you, or we're not going to give loans. That's just simply not what we believe in as a mission-driven organization, Dr. Carter.
I agree, and that is so incredibly important because with certainly our consideration, which we want to talk about a little bit next, around Grad Plus loans going away, just to say, well, listen, that option isn't available anymore. When we know that has directly impacted the number of folks who have graduate degrees and professional degrees. And we need lawyers, and we need physicians, and we need scholars and researchers. I mean, it's incredible. It is this. I really think this is social justice work, again, which is so incredibly important. If we think about equity, access, and what it means to really uh, promote thriving among our communities. Certainly, this access to education and credentials and these opportunities is critically important. And HBCUs have certainly been critical. Again, to use UNCF's metaphor, consistently punch above our weight. And so, without these, by pulling this resource, we've got to figure out how to make sure that we don't stop doing, as you say, Dr. Burmicky, what our missions require us to do and what we're committed to doing. And that is making sure that these opportunities still exist and students can pursue graduate and professional degrees, even if this particular resource goes away. So I appreciate that very much. I know both Aaron and Darian are currently graduate students. Any perspectives, not only as students, but also in terms of the research you're doing on this project about the discontinuation uh, of the Grad Plus program?
Yeah, I think to add to Dr. Burmicky's point, the research shows us that for undergraduates, it's Black female graduates that have the highest self-reported desire to go on to graduate studies. And we see that, and the data is really interesting because it shows that up until they graduate, that demographic group is showing the highest desire to go on to postgraduate work.
Mhm.
And that number just begins to crater the fall after they graduate. And what the data appears to show is that is when those repayment loans begin to hit.
Oh, wow.
So we're having a direct, and to your point, Dr. Carter, I think we are at the point in our history as a people where there is this deep connection
Mhm.
to this next level of education. There is
Mhm.
a deep desire. Black, especially for Black women, there is a huge cohort of us that are graduating on the undergraduate level, and that I think that intersection, to bring it up again, that intersection of generational debt aversion, mixed with I think the economic realities of your first salary check,
Mhm. Mhm.
interacting with what those repayment loan checks
That's right.
or amounts are really having a significant impact, in particular on Black women and our trajectory in postgraduate work. Um, I think that the data bears the same thing for
Mhm.
Black men. I think it's probably even more catastrophic for
Mhm.
men. And so I do think that there is a deep connection between these numbers, between these changes in policy and what we're going to see in the next generation of Black folks and our access to postgraduate work. And so I think it is really imperative for HBCUs and Black organizations and Black leadership really to get together and think of some alternative strategies
Absolutely.
for helping folks make that next step. Because to your point, we do need leaders, we do need lawyers, we do need doctors, we do need those folks, public health officials that are going to need to access postgraduate education, and it shouldn't be because of a burdensome loan that we're not accessing that education. So yeah, Darian, I know you have additional points too.
Yes, I think that you hit a lot of great points. And the one thing that I would just add is a lot of times when we think about graduate loans and how it funds our education, we don't consider the fact that graduate loans funds our lives, honestly, because the cost of living is high and
Absolutely.
it seems to be higher by the day. And when we don't have these funding options for graduate students who sometimes may be on their own. How could you ever expect them to not only enter a program, but to be able to live?
Absolutely. So important. I would also add, and I know this, everyone has their topic already, but one of the things I think is so important to do is I'm very interested in looking at the impact of student loan forgiveness on on um, um, on Black graduate students, people who've earned graduate and professional degrees. Because let me say, this expanded public loan forgiveness that occurred over the last 4 or 5 years has really made a real difference in the lives of many people. And I think if there's a way to capture that and also compare that and look at that and also explore what's happening when that doesn't occur, and that's before and after. So this is a moment. I mean, certainly the last administration's really push for people to take advantage of public service loan forgiveness had all kind of impact that didn't occur before that time, and it doesn't seem to be occurring, won't be occurring at least in the near future. So to look at that 4 or 5 year moment, a number of folks, and that's really across demographics who experience loan relief. That will be a very important topic to consider and to see what it meant in terms of those families and their own ability to fully participate in the economy. And so I look forward to that research that I know will be done. Um, so, any other comments around any of that we just spoke about in terms of the plus loan piece and specifically some experiences from students? Um,
I think I do want to add,
Dr. Mickey,
even
sure.
when it comes to the student experience, and it's something that Darion very rightly said, that we need options, right? I think detailing the options is really important, but we also don't want so many options that is so overwhelming because we have heard of the pain and the confusion that there is to navigate the loan landscape in general, not just Parent Plus loans, but just in general. I think that's a big takeaway that we've learned from families and students is that it's so overwhelming. And even though when we talk to financial administrators, they would say we're bending over backwards, we're trying to provide, there's definitely a little bit of a gap in terms of how students and families feel about their ability to access reliable information and what the financial administrators are telling us. And it's not pointing any fingers really, it's just a reality. It's so complex that how to, so, in higher education, we talk a lot about the cafeteria model of education, that when you give students so many options, at the cafeteria, when you have, this large buffets and stuff, you kind of get overwhelmed, and sometimes you just want to know, okay, where's the burgers and French fries? Like I got to keep it simple because there's just too many options, right? That certainly happens to me when I go anywhere. I can't make a decision; it's too overwhelming. I just want something basic. Where's my burgers and French fries? French fries, okay? That happens the same thing when it comes to advising and financial aid. When you give students and families so many options, you freeze. And now these options are changing. So people are very confused and frozen. So something that I think is, yes, it's okay, it's good to have options, but let's make those options attainable, easy to understand, but also that we have done the work to vet them. Because I do think that a lot of private companies are start offering more competitive interest rates and all of that, but people don't know who they are. And so something that we learned from some of our financial administrators is that some may have like a sheet that is handy that's already been vetted by their office. Because we don't have the time to meet with you and sit down and go over all of your options, here's a resource that we have. I think other organizations, membership and associations should be coming up with these well vetted resources so that families don't feel like they're alone in the wilderness trying to navigate what their options are. Because oftentimes what we heard is, the only reason why I know about Parent Plus Loan is because I have an older child. So I was able to learn about it through them, or my cousin, my aunt, someone told me about it. So we rely a lot on our own networks, but that only goes so far, right? So we really do need to, when it comes to research, who are the organizations, who are the policy organizations, who are the associations that are doing a better job at putting out well vetted resources, particularly as the landscape changes, so we can not only demystify the process, but also simplify it so that we don't suffer from the cafeteria model where we're so overwhelmed with all these options that we end up taking no action or horrible actions because we didn't understand. I believe that everything that you do related to money, and I'm no money expert or financial advisor, but you should be able to understand what you're getting yourself into. Okay, whatever it is that you do with money, it doesn't matter as long as you understand it and you feel really good about it. To me, that makes sense because you then are able to make the decisions that make sense for you. But it's really hard when policies are changing and we don't know what's out there, and there's a huge predatory landscape that we've all experienced to be able to make sound decisions.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm certainly, a takeaway for me certainly is what you just said around demystifying and simplifying. I think that's incredibly important. And I also think that, um, you know, it's true across the board, but for first generation students who are also accessing families, first generation students and their families who are really dealing with the whole complexity of what it means to attend college and to manage, the financial obligation related to attending college is overwhelming, and they're looking for uh, a streamlined process that may not reveal the best options. So I think, as you mentioned, the cafeteria option, I think, again, it can be very confusing for all this things you said, but also partnerships perhaps between universities and banking institutions and all kinds of and other kinds of groups that could help to really provide alternatives that have been vetted and that people can feel comfortable about, because a part of it is not only debt aversion, but it's also debt avoidance. And if you are someone who has challenging finances, challenging credit, not a stable credit history or score, then you also are very vulnerable to predators. And also, you come in not in a strong or confident position. So often, which is why predatory lending works, you feel like you have to take whatever is offered without really realizing that there are some options. I mean, certainly sometimes student loan rates are far higher than other rates that might be available to you, or there are other things that you can think about. And so I love this idea of really thinking about this from a position of agency and strength rather than, and that's on all of our parts, the institutions, students, and families. So I think this research is so important to have this conversation in the open. One of the things I think that helped with the public loan student forgiveness program is there was a lot of illumination. People didn't want to talk about, oh, I owe $200,000, or I started with a $20,000 debt and 15 years later now I owe 75. All of those kinds of stories are empowering because they help people to understand that, I don't have to live in the shadows. People are living off the grid over student loans. I mean, that's true, right? And so how can we really do that differently as institutions, as communities? And I think this research is so critically important to helping us to do that. And so what do you think is on the horizon? What should be on the horizon? I mean, I know, Dr. Mickey, you talked about we've got to really find ways to continue to do the work that we do with HBCUs and other institutions. So what's on the horizon? What do you think should be on the horizon? Some of the things I think we got some hint of, but any more sort of thoughts about what we should be talking about in terms of policy? Mm-hmm.
I think for me, one of the things that was clear in talking with students is the disconnect potentially between the role that institutions have and tuition cost, and more importantly, the types of salaries that people are able to access afterwards. So the narrative I heard often, that Darian and I heard often from students was, we know that our tuition bill's going up, the college is getting all my money, and then when they get all my money, I don't get a good job after I leave. And the kind of blame thread that is throughout feels like it is the students are passing that blame to the institution. And I think that more than anything, it feels like to me like this is an opportunity. I know that the higher education in the United States traditionally has a very individualistic approach as institutions, where we have a tendency to kind of be standalone institutions with our own policies, our own perspectives. But it does feel like this is a moment where operating as institutions collectively, working to shape the larger social narrative about the role that institutions have when it comes to tuition, the role that the state and the federal government in defunding higher education have in those increases in tuition. I just think that higher education institutions have such a strong role to play in both shaping the discourse that I don't think they're necessarily taking an opportunity to do right now. And students in that gap are really filling in a narrative that I think does a disservice to what higher education institutions are doing. And their understanding of, to be frank, the liquidity of endowments. People say that often. Well, Howard has $1 billion. Why can't they give me? Why am I paying a transportation fee? How do we connect those things to students so that they have maybe more of a clear understanding of the complex nature of tuition, of salaries, of first time salaries, and is that something that institutions can do collectively? I think in a way that to your point, Dr. Carter, is a reflection of their strength, is a reflection of their role in society, and I think potentially could re-spark what I think socially has been a valuing of intellectualism prior to potentially the last 20 years. But what does it mean for institutions to reaffirm their role and reaffirm the value of intellectualism in the US? And I think that only happens if if institutions, in particular HBCUs, come together and collectively use their voice in a larger way to speak to maybe changing some of those narratives. So I would love to see a more collective approach.
I think also, as everybody has iterated on this call, student loans are tricky. And tricky, they're hard to understand. The landscape is always changing. The options are like people really don't know. So I think it is really a call to action, and something that a lot of students have spoken about in interviews that me and Aaron have conducted is they want to understand. Going back to Dr. Burmicky's analogy of that buffet model, the buffet is scary when it doesn't have the name tag to tell you what this is. Because now you always have to ask, what's this? But when you don't have anybody there to tell you what it is, you're like, okay, maybe I should just avoid this because this may not be good. So having someone to break down some of these things, or just having processes across the board to break down what some of these things mean, to help students feel as if, they're being guided carefully. We should encourage students to seek processes that make them feel as if they're going to come out on top when they finish at their institutions. Instead, it really feels like we're not doing the best. And when I say we're not doing the best, I mean like on a high level when we talk about like the actual government and the policies, because we talk about some loans, parent plus loans, direct loans that accrue interest, while you're actually in school. It's like, okay, if students don't know this, then they come out and they're like, oh, wow, this loan looks very different than when I first got it, because where did all this extra money come from? So it's like really helping them understand all these options so that when they do graduate, they can feel fulfilled and I made the right choices and now I can go live in a better financial state whenever it comes to graduation. But yeah, main call to action is really just helping streamline some of these processes for student understanding.
The other thing that worries me quite a bit is for decades now, legislators have been quite effective about villainizing higher education. And that phenomenon has caused a lot of resentment, public resentment, and questioning of the value of higher education. So let me just give you an example. The vast majority, I've been doing work with financial administrators for quite some time beyond this Parent Plus loan study. And what I've learned is that financial aid advisors go into the profession because they truly want to change students' lives. They really believe that this work matters and can have a huge impact on students and families long term. And I really, really do believe in that and the sincerity of their motivation to be in financial aid. However, because of fear of compliance, because of the situation that we have talked to about earlier, a lot of these financial aid administrators are villainized, and they're also almost like the bad guy in the movie. They're like, oh, why are they so unresponsive? Why are they not giving the aid? Oh, how come? Why did they mess up? But we forget that, when we started doing this study, it was in the middle of the Parent Plus study. It was in the middle of the financial aid rollout, all the issues when it comes to adjusting cost of inflation and all of that. That rollout was a mess. That was last fall. That was fall of 2024. I know it feels like forever ago, but it really wasn't. That was just last fall. And it was crazy. It was so hard to be in financial aid. And they ended up getting all the hate. And really, a lot of this was not on them. They really actually wanted to do a wonderful job of being caring and empathetic, but they just simply didn't have the bandwidth because you have this huge structural force against you because you have to remain compliant. There's a reason why most community colleges across the United States are no longer issuing loans, period, because of the high default rate. Because what that does to an institutional's ability to remain compliant is tremendous. And this impacts particular smaller HBCUs quite a bit. That they are, at the end of the day, if a student defaults, they're the ones that are going to have to carry the blame. They're the ones that are going to get penalized by the federal and state governments, and the compliance comes even harder after that if they have a very high default rate. So I would like to see more research that is empathetic and humanizing towards all of us who are in higher education, because let me tell you, more than ever before, particularly with changes in technology, AI, I believe the value of a higher education degree is more important than ever before. because of the thinking, the networks, the human flourishing and development that happens while you're in these spaces. It will never be replaced, in my opinion. So we really do need to do a better job at stop villainizing higher education, particularly these people that are boots on the ground doing the work, talking to families that are here because they wanted to change lives. No, they're not the bad guys. They're not overpaying themselves. It's not because of administrative load. It's because the reality is that the system is so complex. Someone's got to take care of it. And the people that are actually taking care of it are getting the hardest blame. And people are capitalizing politically over this narrative. And it's very pervasive. And I really do believe in the necessity of higher education, especially with all the changes that we're seeing. And it's getting farther and farther away from, your average consumer of higher education, and it really troubles me.
That's well put. And Dr. Burmicky, I really appreciate that because oftentimes you're right. And certainly as a higher ed scholar, it's important to remember that again, we being cast as villains when in fact that's the opposite of what we're trying to do, and certainly financial aid officers and people who are leading those offices are trying to deal with all the other kinds of issues that are really hoisted upon them, some of which have nothing to do, and maybe in some ways are counter to their efforts. And so that's a very important point. I think it's important for us to, like you said, have humanizing research that doesn't seek to point and blame and deflect. And the issue really, for me, the larger issue, when I say larger, overarching issue that sort of permeates all of this is, equity, the social issues, economic issues that impact folks' ability to access opportunity. And so, if in fact we believe that student loans or federal support is a part of what it means to be a nation that wants to make sure that all folks, regardless of their their current economic situation, they have access to higher education, post-secondary access is important. And so I think your point is extremely important. And I think there's so much here that we share today. I mean, there's some phrases I was taking notes because I can't remember things. Yeah, I've been at this a long time, but certainly this idea around um, demystifying and simplifying and what Darian, I like phrases when he said student loans are tricky. I thought that's it. That's very powerful for a whole host of reasons, and certainly Aaron's notion too about intellectualism and do we value that and what that means for the nation. I think these are also incredibly important issues. And it's so important that we're all educated about what this means for all of us and empowering people to act in ways that so that they can continue to support their own ascension. We have to do that collectively, but also we can empower people with information and with perspectives that are meant to really help them to make the best decisions for themselves and their families, and also for our institutions to make the best decisions. How can we empower financial aid directors and officers and also other kinds of administrators to have a perspective about how we do this work that will ensure that equity that we have an equity agenda and we're supporting access and opportunity. So I appreciate all of that. And so, any final closing remarks from each of you about this work. Certainly, the impact of student loan reform and what that means in terms of affording the dream. We talk about access to higher education as really the realization of a dream. And what does that mean for all of us, and certainly for us at HBCUs? Final remarks. We'll start with our students, I guess. Not our students, our researchers. They are students, but they're researchers. And I'll start with Aaron and then Darian, and then we'll close with Dr. Burmicky, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think obviously we're in challenging political times right now, and I think there are lots of things that people are thinking about and lots of changes that I think people are considering, and I think there's lots of changes to the higher education landscape as well. And I think with that being said, solving the issue of how to make higher education affordable to all is one of the most paramount issues of our time, in particular as it relates to making sure that education is available to marginalized communities. I don't think that there are many things that are more important than that. And I don't think that there are many things in which solving that issue touches upon so many different other aspects of life. And as a researcher, it's really exciting to research something that does something like that, that is not siloed, but instead allows me to explore one topic and allows that rolls down the hill to have such an exponential impact on people's lives. And as researchers, you want that opportunity to explore something that potentially could change the way that people live for the better. And that's really what this research is about, is making sure that folks have access to education, and that accessing education does not mean that you have to sacrifice other parts of your future to make that happen. And I think it's that second part. It's that caveat that people are really not considering. And for folks like Darren and myself, who generationally have experienced just such a significant change to higher education as it relates to, as it compares to our parents and grandparents, I think that it is paramount that we get this right and that we figure this out sooner rather than later. So,
On Aaron's point to access, we talk about having these options explained to us, but also having good options for repayment. And we talk about continuing options for forgiveness. How many non-traditional students do we see take on higher education? Because we know that these people who are graduating from these institutions, these are our innovators. So when we allow them to be a little more financially free, it's okay to take the job that's $50,000 because I don't have $100,000 in loans. So it's going to not only stimulate some of the morale around attending some of these higher education institutions, but it will inevitably stimulate the economy. And I think that that's the thing that we want to look towards when we talk about having a strong nation. So those are some of like the key points that I take away. We really just need to find a way to stop pointing fingers, but work together so that we can have the best outcome for everyone, but especially for our students.
And I'll close with, I'm an immigrant to this country. I am the product of higher education. I would never be here today had it not been because of scholarships and generous people and all kinds of things that came away for me to be able to afford college. I can't imagine my life without it, honestly. And I still very much believe fully, and I'm committed forever to the power and the transformative power of American higher education. I really do think that we still have the best higher education system in the world. I think the way that it's lifted people when it comes to social mobility, opportunity, and just dreaming big is something that I would have never even been able to fathom. So I really believe that we're at an intersection where we can actually, believe it or not, bring people together. I would never be an advocate for getting people more in debt. That is not what I'm about. But I also am not an advocate for denying education. So I think there's a really good opportunity for us to come together and really talk about what a wonderful thing it is that we have, and what a silly thing it is that we are finding ourselves divided when we want the best for each other. We really do. And I know we believe in this thing because I talk to people every day, whether it's my students, my research, my family, my neighbors who come to me for all kinds of college advice, church communities, like you name it, it's everywhere. This conversation is universal in American life. And I really do think that this is a great opportunity for us to come together and say, you know what, we have big legislative changes coming. But more than ever, we're going to work together to educate the public even more so they don't feel limited. Because yes, this is devastating, but we have options, as Darian shared. But we have to be really educated about those options. As an educator, that's where I feel the most empowered because I have the ability to talk about what these options are, what's real, what's not, demystifying, simplifying. And I think right now is a great time to be doing that. And times will change. Policies will shift, governments will also change. And I really do think we have to be more ready than ever before. So I hope that we find this time to unify people, to really go beyond political ideology, and just really get to work because all of us deserve this and more. And I really don't think we should be blocking that dream for the next generation of college students in this country and the world, really. So I'll just leave it there.
All right. Well said to say the least, and I certainly couldn't agree more. And I think this is a time for to unify and to also advocate collectively. This series on policy positions and perspectives really is intended to focus on issues that could generate um, policy discourse and change. And so I really do appreciate the work that you are doing. And Dr. Burmicky, I always say he's an example of a researcher. Oftentimes we say, we're doing research, and does it really matter to the people? Okay, to use a '70s parlance. Okay, but yes, Dr. Mickey's work is certainly very much centered on what it can do for the people, all of us. And so I really appreciate him and his work, and I appreciate Aaron and Darion in your work as well. I think we're in good hands, certainly in higher education. So again, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a very, very important topic, certainly affording the dream, the impact of student loan reform on HBCU access and success is exactly what we intended it to be, a great conversation for all of us that will have an impact upon how we see student loan reform, and higher ed access. So again, thanks for joining us and have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.